online? Follow me on YouTube?
No.
You don't have to follow me, but they're on there. Go to Google Classroom.
Okay, so I have a feeling you made like a video, like other stuff. You would make everything awkward.
Yeah, I'm a math teacher. Are you surprised by that? Yeah, okay. I normally make things awkward anyway. That's the type of person I am. Was I supposed to take offense to that? Okay, sorry. Okay, so as I look at the quadratic formula, as you read this, this is another way to solve quadratics if you cannot factor them. So Monday and Tuesday we said, actually last Wednesday, we solved quadratics by graphing. How did we solve quadratics or find the solutions? By looking at a graph. Or the roots, or the x-intercepts, or the zeros, all the same things. How did I find the solutions? Using a graph. You graphed it and did what? Go back and look at your notes when we talked about the roots. If I looked for the roots or the solutions using a graph, I graphed it, and then how did I tell what the solutions were? Okay, we did it. We had a quiz over at Friday. We did it last Wednesday. Go back and look at your notes. This is stuff you need to know. When I graphed it, how do I find the solution of a quadratic when I graph the parabola?
Know where it crosses on the x-axis.
Well, yes, where it crosses the x-axis. That's how we found the solution using a graph. We graphed the parabola and said, what values does it cross at on the x-axis? Could be 0, could not cross at all. It could cross at one place, or it could cross at two places. Monday and Tuesday of this week, we said factoring. We got it equal to 0, we factored it, and we set each parenthesis part equal to 0. That's how we solve using factoring. Now, the quadratic formula is going to be useful when you cannot factor it. So there will be some, and we will talk about it next week. You will have to decide, can I factor it, can I not factor it? Today, we're just going to practice the quadratic formula. Next week, we're going to combine them all together and say you have to choose whether to factor or use a quadratic formula. Some problems cannot be solved by factoring. The quadratic formula can be used in a situation to find the quadratic roots. The nice thing about the quadratic formula is it always works. So if you cannot figure out how to do it using factoring or the method we're going to talk about next week, you can always go back to the quadratic formula, which I know is out of the 3 ways is probably the most annoying, but it always works. That's the nice thing about it. So here's my quadratic formula. Right there. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You will not have to have it memorized. Now, it is x equals, which makes sense because we are looking for my x values. If you go back and look at the notes we did with factoring, we got x equals 2 and x equals 4, x equals something, or x equals whatever. So we're looking for x equals numbers. Same thing. We could solve 2 solutions. We could have 1 solution. We could have 0 solution. So we're going to look at examples that has 2 solutions, 1 solutions, or 0 solutions, so you can see what it's going to look like. So all you do, yes.
Okay, I need the plus sign. Why is there a line underneath that?
This is dividing.
Oh, like the plus sign, like b.
Oh, plus or minus. We'll talk about that in a second. So we're going to take this and add it to the square root and then subtract it to the square root. When we actually look at one, it'll make more sense, I think. But if it doesn't, ask me again. So first thing you want to do, here's an example. First thing you want to make sure it is set equal to 0. Just like factoring. So first thing, I'm going to kind of write down a few steps for you. First thing, make sure it's set equal to 0, just like we did with factoring. If there's stuff on one side, move it over to the left side or the right side. It doesn't really matter. That's the first thing you need to do. Second thing you need to do, step 2, is find A, B, and C. We have done that before. If I give you a quadratic and I say find A, B, and C, we've done it before. If I look at this quadratic, what's my A value? What's the A value?
B angle 6
4. You're right. It has something to do with the x squared, but the actual A value is 1. It is the number in front of x squared. There's nothing there, so we assume it's a positive 1. So my A value is a positive 1. My B value is Good. It's in front of the x, and my c value is 4. We ignore the equal 0, just like we did with factoring. We've done this before. A is the number in front of x squared, b is the coefficient or the number in front of x, so -6, and c is the constant, which means it's the number without an x or x squared. That's the second step. You've done it before, not too hard. The third step is plug into the formula. This is exactly like we did on the warm-up, except what we're plugging it into is a little more complicated. So you have to keep track of your negatives and positives and your signs and all that stuff. So plug it in and be careful when you plug it in. So as I look at my formula, it is a negative. So let's put x equals first, so we know what we're solving for. X equals, it's a negative b. What is my b value? B value. -6. So it's a -6, just like we did on the warm-up. If it's a negative b, you have to put a negative out front. B is a -6, so it's a -6. Yes. No, just kidding. That's with there. Okay, plus or minus the square root of, well, I'm following the formula, b squared. What's my b value? So it's -6 squared. So I'm writing it all out first, and then we'll worry about simplifying it. Minus 4 times a, what's my a value? Times c. Now if you look at your formula, that is all over. This is where I see a mistake at. You just put a lot of people just put like the division line over the square or under the square root part. It's all over. So the division is underneath all of it. 2 times a. What's my a value? 1. So that is the third step. Plug in a, b, and c. Be careful when you plug it in. Use parentheses if you have negatives. Now, as I look at this, before we go through and simplify this, anyone see a part of this? I'll give you a piece of candy if you can find it out. Anybody see a part of this equation, a part of the quadratic formula that looks familiar?
The negative 4ac.
The 2a.
Close.
The negative b and the 2a.
No. There is part of this that's a formula that we already used.
Okay, is
Negative
the
b
negative
and
b
2a.
and
Negative
2a?
6 and
No.
2a.
Oh,
We did use negative b and 2a like 2
Yeah,
weeks ago,
okay.
this week or last week.
If
Kind
not,
of.
Why do you even
but because it's kind of, yeah, okay, kind
I
of.
thought we used
You
b
already-
and
There's a more specific part that we've used.
Oh, the
squared
4,
minus
the b
4 and
squared.
Yeah, b squared minus 4ac is what? What's the formula for what?
Those 6 boxes at the end.
Yeah, you know where it's at in your notes.
It's solutions. Two
No.
solutions. One
The b
solution.
squared minus 4ac formula came from the 6 boxes at the end of the notes, which is right. Nope, sorry. B squared minus 4ac was the formula for what? Nope. Nope. B squared minus 4ac. Discriminant. Good. Yeah, I'll get you a piece. I'll get you a piece of that. So yeah, the b squared minus 4ac was the discriminant. And we'll talk about why that is in a second. But that b squared minus 4ac you've done before. So you've already done some of this before. You've already done part of the simplifying before when we did the discriminant. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through and simplify this. Everyone needs to have a calculator out, and you need to go through with us to make sure you understand what we're doing.
I got you.
It is doable, but this is where I see most mistakes. The simplification, will you grab me one too? The simplification is where I see most of the mistakes.
I get 2 pieces now.
We'll see. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through and simplify. Start in the upper left-hand corner and just go through and simplify it. What's a negative times a -6? Positive 6. I go from left to right. Plus or minus, write exactly what you have. Go from left to right. Plus or minus the square root. What is -6 squared?
36.
Positive 36. Remember, a negative squared is a positive. And then I have a -4 times 1 times 4. So what is a -4 times 1 times 4? -16. All over 2. I know there's lots of stuff going on, but go from left to right and just simplify each part first. Don't try to do it all at once. Don't try to plug it all in your calculator. You will screw it up, I promise. Okay, the next one, if I look at this, that was weird. 6 plus or minus, let's simplify in this square root. Order of operations, do the inside part first. What is 36 minus 16? 20. All over 2. Now, how many answers will I normally get with when I solve quadratics? 2. So I'm going to normally get 2 answers. So as I look at this is kind of the plus or minus part you were talking about earlier, Destiny. One answer is going to be 6 plus square root of 20 divided by 2. That's going to be where one answer comes from, because that plus and minus means it's 6 plus square root of 20 over 2. And you also get an answer when you do 6 minus square root of 20 over 2. So that's where that plus or minus comes from. That means you can have a 6 plus square root of 20 divided by 2, or a 6 minus square root of 20 divided by 2. Now, if you plug this in your calculator, you're going to get, I want you to get decimal when you do these. When you plug it into your calculator, let me kind of pay attention to this because this is where I'll see mistakes at. Use parentheses. If you want to plug it in all at once, which is what I see most of you wanting to do, use parentheses. So 6 parenthesis 6 plus square root. How do I get the square root button? Second x squared. So look at press your second, and then right above the x squared you'll see a blue square root button. So second x squared. That'll give you 6 plus the square root of 20. Now if you look at this, I need a parenthesis to end the square root part, and I need another parenthesis. So why do I need a parenthesis around the 6 plus square root of 20? The order of operations. Why do I need a parenthesis around the 6 plus square root of 20? Yeah, that says you add the top first, and then you put a divide by 2. So that's how it should look. If you plug it in your calculator, make sure you put parentheses around the 6, like the top part, to say you do this part first, and then you can put divide by 2. So make sure yours looks like that. Any questions on that? Enter, and you're going to get 5.24. You can just round to 2 places, that's fine. 5 point to the 100th place. So 5.24. So one is 5.24. Now you do the same thing, but you do the minus part. So put your parenthesis, 6 minus second x squared, square root of 20. So the only difference is that it's now 6 minus instead of 6 plus. Divide by 2. And your answer is 0.76. And those are your 2 answers. You can put them in curly brackets if you want to. You don't really need to. So my 2 answers are 5.24 and 0.76. So we're still solving. We're getting x equals. So x equals 5.24 and x equals 0.76. So if you would graph this, you would see the parabola would cross at 5.24 and 0.76. That's the issue with graphing. You would have no idea that is 0.76 by graphing it, because it would just be between 0 and 1. So that's why we don't use graphing a whole lot, but it's good to know. Okay, any questions on that one? Okay, let's go ahead and look at, let's look at 10. So let's skip to 10. I'm going to skip around a few because I want to do some of each type. Let's look at 10. Any questions so far? Okay, if I look at 10, the first step, is it equal to 0? Yeah, so the first step is done for you, just like factoring. The second step, let's find A, B, and C. You don't have to write this step necessarily down. I don't really care, but it's kind of helpful to kind of know what to plug in. It's up to you. So A, B, and C. As I look at this quadratic, what is my A value? 1 in front of x squared. What's my b value? 11. It's the number in front of x. Now I ignore the equal 0 part. What is my c value? 0. There's nothing there, just like we've done before. If there's no constant, then it's just a 0. So I like writing down a, b, and c first because it kind of helps when I plug stuff in. Okay, third step, plug it into the quadratic formula. You will not have to have the quadratic formula memorized. I will give it to you. Don't worry about it memorized, just be able to use it. So negative b, what's my b value?
11.
So negative 11 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 11 squared minus 4, which is always there, times a, what's my a value? Times c, which is 0, all over what? 2 times 1, 2a, or 2 times 1. So make sure you put it all over 2 times a. Any questions on the plugging in part? It's just like we did on the warm-up, except it's a little more complicated. Now let's go through and simplify. Negative 11 is just there. Plus or minus the square root of 11 squared. $121. And then multiply. Negative 4 times 1 times 0. 0. Yeah, I'm multiplying by 0. So anytime I multiply by 0, it's negative 4 times 1, negative 4 times 0. It's 0. I don't need it there. All over 2. So go through from top left over and then do the bottom and simplify it. You guys can do that. You've done it before. Now, anyone see what's going to be different about this?
It's a perfect square.
It's a perfect square. Yeah, sometimes you get perfect square. So as I simplify again, I have negative 11 plus or minus. What is the square root of 121? 11. So that just gets rid of the square root. If you get a perfect square and you can take the square root of it, then you just get a whole number. The square root of 121 is 11, so it's just plus or minus 11. And it's all over 2. So as I get my two answers, I have the first one, negative 11 plus 11 divided by 2. And my other one is negative 11 minus 11 all divided by 2. So write out your two possibilities. You could have a negative 11 plus 11 divided by 2 and a negative 11 minus 11 because it's plus or minus. Any questions so far? Let's simplify. What's negative 11 plus 11?
0.
0 divided by 2? 0. So there's one answer. You don't really need a calculator for that necessarily.
Wouldn't it be x equals 0?
Yes. Yeah, technically. Negative 11 minus 11
Negative 22.
over 2. So what's negative 22 divided by 2?
Negative 11.
Negative 11. So x equals, if you want to do brackets, you can just put it like this. 0 and negative 11. So sometimes you're not going to get fractions every time. If you get a perfect square, sometimes you're not going to get fractions. It just depends. Okay. Questions so far? Okay. You guys seem to be doing pretty good with that. Let's look at 14. Yes?
What if it doesn't equal 0?
There you go. So, good point. Look at 14. That's a great segue. I appreciate that.
Alright.
You're good. No, you're good. So, as I look at 14, it doesn't equal 0. You do it just like we did factoring. If this doesn't equal 0, look at 14. If it doesn't equal 0, what do I have to do to get it equal to 0? You got to make it equal to 0. So, what would be the easiest? Move 4x squared plus 9 to the right side, or to the right side, or 12x to the left side? Yeah, it's exactly like we did with factoring. So subtract 12x. There's nothing to combine the negative 12x with because there's no just x on the left side, so I'm just going to put it in the middle. Make sure it's in standard form. So 4x squared minus 12x plus 9 equals 0. That makes sense, Sean? You do it just like factoring. Get it equal to 0. So that's the first step if you need to do it. Second step. Identify A, B, and C. Brittany, A is what? 4. Good. Megan, B is what? Negative 12. Don't forget the negative because that will screw up your answer. And C is what, Kinsley? 9. So once you get it equal to 0, identify A, B, and C. We've done it a lot. You guys can do this stuff. The quadratic formula I know is kind of intimidating, but it's very doable. Any questions so far? Third step, let's plug it in. So quadratic formula, I have a negative b. What's my b value? Negative 12. So be careful. It's a negative b. So a negative, negative 12. Plus or minus the square root of negative 12 squared. B squared. So negative 12 squared. Yep. Negative 4, which is always there, times a times c. A is 4. C is 9. So it's b squared, negative 12 squared, minus 4, which is always there, times a, which is 4, times c, which is 9. All over, make sure you put it all over, this is where I see a mistake at, 2 times a. So that's going to be 2 times what? 4. Now, any questions on plugging it in? Keep track of your negatives. So go from left to right. Negative, negative 12. Positive 12. We're not squaring it. It's just a negative times that negative makes it a positive. Plus or minus the square root. Now we get to it. Negative 12 squared.
Negative 144.
Negative 12 squared. Positive 144. A negative squared is always a positive. Make sure you use parentheses like we talked about when we did the vertex stuff. Positive 144, and then multiply. You can multiply 3 numbers together. What's negative 4 times 4?
Negative 16.
Times 9.
Negative 144.
Negative 144. Use your calculator if you need to. Negative 144. All over, that was from negative 4 times 9. Use your calculator if you need to. Negative 144. All over 2 times 4? 8. What's going to happen? 12 plus or minus. What happens under the square root? Yeah, 144 minus 144 is 0. So the square root of 0 all over 8. What's that going to do to my answer? Can I take the square root of 0? Yeah, I can. I can take the square root of 0. It's 0. So I can take the square root of 0. So what do I have left on top? Just a 12. 12 over 8. So since I can't, adding and subtracting 0 is really the same thing. So that plus or minus isn't there. Adding and subtracting 0 you don't really need there. So I just end up with 12 over 8, which reduces to... Did I do something wrong? They did something wrong. Yeah, they did something wrong. Okay, what's 12 over 8 reduced to? 4. Nope, not 4. 3 halves, sorry. 3 halves. Divide top and bottom by 4. 3 halves. Now, how many answers do I end up with? 1. Now, think about the discriminant. When the discriminant equaled what, how many answers did I get? Remember when I did the discriminant last Wednesday? When the discriminant equals 0, I got 1 solution. The discriminant is the part in the square root. So the part underneath the square root was the discriminant. It equals 0. I end up with 1 solution. So it kind of goes back to what we did with discriminant. Not a big deal if that doesn't make 100% sense, but do the same thing. So if you get 0 under the square root, you're only getting one answer because you lose the plus or minus. So x equals 3/2. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Let's look at, I want to do, do what? Yeah, I want to do 11. You'll see why I want to do 11 in a second. So let's look at 11. 11 won't take too long because it's already equal to 0. We'll see what it looks like. So as I look at 11, I notice it's already equal to 0. So the first step's already done for us. So the second step, we can just skip to the second step and find A, B, and C. A value is what? 2, B value is, and C value is 4. So this is going to be kind of nice because none of them are negative, so I don't really have to worry about plugging in any negative numbers. And it's already equal to 0. So A is 2, B is 5, C is 4. So step 3, if I actually plug it into the quadratic formula, it's negative B. So what's my B value? So negative 5 plus or minus the square root of what squared? 5 squared, B squared, 5 squared, minus 4 times A, which is, times C, which is, all over 2 times 2 times A. So 2 times 2. So plugging it in, be careful, make sure you're plugging in correctly. As I go through to simplify this, so negative 5 plus or minus the square root, 5 squared, 25. Negative 4 times 2 times 4, negative 32. All over what? Questions so far? Okay, negative 5, let's simplify the square root part, plus or minus the square root, what's going to be under the square root? 25 minus 32. All over 4. Now what does that tell me about the discriminant? The discriminant was the part under the square root. So my discriminant is a what? Negative. It's less than 0. How many solutions did I have when my discriminant was negative or less than 0? None. I didn't have any solutions. So the reason is because I cannot take the square root of a negative. Anytime you get square root of a negative, so if you want to somehow bubble it in, that square root of a negative is always going to give me no solution. So anytime you're working through this and you see I'm going to end up getting a square root of a negative, you can stop. It's no solution. You do not have to go any further. So that square root of a negative is the reason why it's no solution. Okay. Questions? I want to do one more with you. I want to do 16, the hard one with you. And then we'll be good for today. There's time done for the homework. Okay, let's look at 16. We're not going to do 15, so if you need to run into the space for 15, that's fine. Okay, so let's look at 16. 16 is going to be one of the harder ones you do because it's not set equal to 0, and there's a lot of crap on the left and right side. So as I look at this, it does not matter which side you get equal to 0. Which side would be easier to move stuff over? Left to the right or right to the left? Because there's less terms. I would do left to right because there's less terms. So I'm going to subtract 3x squared and line it up on the other side with the like terms, if there are any. So I'm going to subtract 3x squared and I line it up underneath the x squared on the right side. I subtract 7x and I'm going to line it up with the negative 2x on the other side. So it's helpful to line it up, I think, if you can. If there's nothing to combine it with, you can just put it wherever, but line it up if you can. What's going to be on the left side? Left side? 0. So everything cancels on the left side, so it's 0, which is what the point of doing it was. Now on the right side, What is 1x squared minus 3x squared?
Negative 2x squared.
Negative 2x squared. Negative 2x minus 7x. Can someone grab that real quick?
5x.
You got it. Lane got it. Thank you. What's negative 2x minus 7x?
5x.
Negative 2x minus 7x. Negative 2 minus 7.
-9.
Negative 9x plus 15. Doesn't matter which side you get equal to 0. I usually use the side that has the less amount of terms. Okay, any questions so far? So that one is harder, getting equal to 0. Sean, stay with us, please. We're almost done. Okay, so as I look at this, that was the first step, get it equal to 0. Second step is to find A, B, and C. So ignore the 0 part and just look at the part that has the polynomial on it. A value is, B value, -9, C value, 15. Good. As I look at the third step is actually plugging it into the quadratic formula. I'm going to use the space in 15 just so I have plenty of space to work. So let's look. Quadratic formula. Negative B. What's my B value? So it's a negative out front, parenthesis -9. Plus or minus the square root of what squared?
9 squared.
-9 squared, so put it in parentheses, -9 squared minus 4 times A, what's my A value? Times C, which is 15. All over 2 times -2. So plug it in. Be careful. I know there's lots of stuff to keep track of. Just be careful with the plugging it in part. So any questions on the plugging in part? Use your calculator and start simplifying. Start with the top left, work your way across the top, and then do the bottom. What is a negative times a -9? Positive 9 plus or minus the square root. We're just going left to right. What's -9 squared? 81, positive 81. And then use your calculator. -4 times -2 times 15. So what's -4 times -2 times 15? What is it? 120. All over what? -4. You guys can do this. I know it's overwhelming because there's lots of stuff. Go with each little part and plug it in your calculator. Now I have 9 plus or minus. Let's look at my square root. What's 81 plus 120? 201. All over -4. And then we can split it up to the plus and minus. 9 plus square root of 201 divided by -4 is one answer. And then the other one comes from 9 minus the square root of 201 divided by -4. So once you get it down to the square root of a number, split it up into the plus part and the minus part, and then plug it in your calculator like I showed you earlier. So make sure you use parentheses. So if I do the plus part first, parenthesis 9 plus second x squared, the square root of 201, and then you need 2 parentheses, divided by what? Now be careful with the -4. I would put -4 in parentheses too, and make sure you use the negative button and not the subtraction. So the negative button is left of the enter button. I tend to overuse parentheses, but whatever. And we should get -5.79, just rounded 2 places is fine. So negative x equals -5.79. Remember it's x equals, that's your quadratic formula. I always forget it, but it's x equals. And then my next part, do the minus part. If you want to, here's a hint. We'll let you do this. scroll over, like so you don't have to type it all in. So you can just press the left button and scroll over, and then just go put the cursor over plus, put a minus, and then press enter. It'll save you from having to type it all over again. X equals 1.29. If you don't have one of these calculators at home, they're $10. I would go buy one. Because it's a lot easier to do it on this calculator than the kind that don't have the 2 lines, honestly. So those are my 2 answers. X equals negative 5.79 and X equals 1.29. How do we feel about this? You seem to be doing okay. My other times I've taught this, they've hated it, but I think it's okay. Okay, so let me pass out the homework. You have a good chunk of examples for people to look at. I did one of each, at least one of each type, so you see 1 solution, 2 solutions.